And we are live.
Welcome everyone to Connected Learning TV. This is the final webinar of a month-long series that's been organized by Educator Innovator titled Looking Closely at Student Work in the Digital Age. I'm Christina Cantrell. I'm from the National Writing Project, and I'll be your host for today. Throughout June, we've had several partners working on this series: KQED, Educator Innovator, the Maker Education Initiative, and Project Zero. And everybody's been helping us really look at the ways that student production is changing in the digital age, and how educators, as well as and alongside learners and makers themselves, can make sense of these shifts that are happening today. We're going to be chatting with a group involved in the Maker Education Open Portfolio project, so I'm really excited about that. This is a project which aims to develop a common set of practices for open portfolio creation and sharing. But before we dive into that, we want to go over a few connected learning-ish details. So for those who are watching live right now, we welcome your comments. So you can comment either on the event page, the Google Plus event page, or you can tweet to the Connected Learning hashtag. And John, who is our silent producer in the background with the Connected Learning Alliance, will bring those questions to us so we can integrate them into our discussion here. Also, throughout the rest of this month, we encourage you to continue this conversation about looking closely at student work in the digital age. And we'll be chatting at the Connected Learning Google community, which we encourage you to join, as well as using the same Connected Learning hashtag in an ongoing way. So thank you for joining us today. So without further ado, I'd really like to give our guests a chance to briefly introduce themselves. Each of us, including myself actually, are members of the Open Portfolio Project's National Working Group, and several people here started this initiative. So I wanted to give everybody a chance to give their name and where they're from. I was also thinking that because of the rich history of portfolios and the potentially multiple perspectives that people watching this today bring to the mix, and because of the history and backgrounds that I know exist within this group, I thought that we could even just start with sharing what brings us to working with or thinking about portfolios in the first place. And that this would be a nice way to start to show some of the threads that are being brought together to think about open portfolios today. So I have the task of pointing out who is on the left. So Anna, maybe we'll go left to right, and you are first.
All right. Hi. So my name is Anna. I'm a doctoral student at Indiana University at the Learning Sciences program. I have a background in designing digital tools in close collaboration with teachers and students. And yeah, as Christina said, I'm involved with the Open Portfolio Project. And what fascinates me about portfolios is exactly because they are so different. There are so many different kinds of portfolios that can support young makers in so many different ways. Like, for example, documenting their process in relation to different kind of artifacts that they create, but also in relation to their personal development, sort of reflecting their decision-making and potential future steps that they want to be involved with, future projects, and so on. And at the same time, they're really context-specific and really building on the kinds of tools that are available in the spaces and sort of the learning intentions, and that is really context-specific. Everybody's sort of really different, and every space is a little different. And so I'm really interested in understanding what are different documentation practices already out there, and how can we build on these together with young makers through participatory design to get into our better understanding of what are really excellent portfolio practices.
Great, thank you. Christian, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Christian McKay, and I'm also a doctoral student in the Learning Sciences program here at Indiana University. My background is I have an MFA in sculpture, and I've been a working artist for like 20 years now, I guess, which makes me seem old now that I say it. I've also worked as a high school art teacher, and I was the AP art teacher as well for the high school that I worked at. And so that's kind of my direct link to portfolio use as a practitioner, both in my own profession and also as an educator myself. And I'm really interested in the capacity of portfolios to function as a learning tool. And I'm really interested in how they can be kind of reconsidered from even the assessment and the summative assessment functions that they certainly served in the AP art portfolios that I was working with the students with. So I'm kind of interested in. We've had discussions around identity development and curational aspects of portfolios, and I think that there's significant promise for portfolios to function in that regard, so that learners are not just developing just their identity in the general sense, but also how they're developing their identity as learners as well. So.
Great, thank you, Christian.
Yeah.
Hilary, you are next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hilary Kolos, and I am the Director of Digital and Teen Programs at DreamYard, which is in the Bronx. We are the largest arts education provider in the Bronx. We're an early adopter of UMedia and are a member of New York Hive. And we're sort of new in our connection to the Open Portfolio project. We were so excited when I talked to Christine about that and made this connection because we at DreamYard have been working together in a partnership with Parsons, the New School of Design. And we did a pilot last year that was funded by the New York Community Trust, their Hive Digital Media and Learning Fund. And then we just got kind of our next level of funding to take it bigger. And yeah, we're super excited to have a 2-year grant to take it to the next level and spread it more across all of the work that we do. And basically, we're trying to figure out, right along with everyone else, best practices for digital portfolio development. And I think as an organization, we're really excited about helping our young people tell their story in a broader way. It's not just about your SAT scores or your grades, but really looking at connected learning and what are the other things you do in your life, what are the things you do at our art center, what are the things you do for academics, and we think digital portfolios are a great way to talk about that. And then just really quickly, personally, I am really interested in the whole assessment conversation that we're having. I've had a little trouble getting into the, I've been around the badge conversation, had trouble getting into it, and now that I'm talking about portfolios, I'm seeing ways that it all works together, and so I'm really excited to talk generally about assessment with digital learning and how badges and portfolios can kind of work together to tell a fuller story of what our young people are learning and doing. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Hilary, and congratulations on that award, too. So, Jessica.
Are you skipping Stephanie? Sorry. In the order that I see.
Yeah, the order is different. So.
My order is different. Now I'm confused. So my name is Jessica Ross, and I work at Project Zero on a project called Agency by Design, which I think we'll get into a bit more during this. But I had sort of 3 distinct experiences I thought of when you asked us to think about, how we came to portfolios and understand them. Some of those parallel Christians, but in a different discipline. So I was a middle school English and history teacher for 10 years. And so my first experience was thinking about, writing workshop and portfolio in the English classroom, being an advocate for national writing project practices and writing with my students, which also meant building portfolio with my students and thinking about that. My next move in a few years later was becoming English department chair, and then of course thinking about scale and thinking about the school culture and portfolios and other teachers' experience with portfolios and how to turn these into something beyond sort of the receptacle at the end of the year, throw things in a folder, and maybe that was just, as Christian mentioned, an assessment piece to add to some scores. How to make the students be a part of the process and not just have this be something the teachers felt was a paperwork burden. An interesting thing that happened while I was department chair was Common Core came in and we can save that for another webinar, but just the idea about the Common Core literacy standards being a possibility space for interdisciplinary, so maybe the English department talking with the science and the history department and how that might work. So that was sort of an interesting way to look at portfolios. And lastly, as a grad student in a writing department, I had to build my own e-portfolio. And the department had sort of a genre set. They were expecting, you know, a journalism portfolio, a creative writing portfolio, but I was in education and staying in that discipline. So at that point, then I had to sort of advocate and curate my e-portfolio for a grad writing student staying in the education field. So those kind of just three different lenses that move me through thinking about portfolios, which make all this work really exciting to look at for me.
Great, thank you. It's really interesting. Okay, Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Jung. I'm the Director of Youth Engagement at Maker Ed, at the Maker Education Initiative, and I have the honor of getting to work with all of these lovely people as part of the Open Portfolio Project. We collaborate directly with Indiana University and their creativity labs led by Dr. Kylie Pepler, and all of these other ladies on the webinar today are also part of our national working group who help to advise and chime in on everything that we're doing as part of this project, which is generously funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Personally, I've been working in informal education for almost 10 years now, and so actually, similarly to Jessica, one of the interesting things that brought me to portfolios is something that I had to do as a master's student, which is curate my own as an education student, and I too thought that was really interesting because I drew a lot of just information from art, science, and other design portfolios, and was curious to figure out what I wanted to showcase. And then in my work with young makers and youth in general in informal science and art, it's been really interesting to see young makers specifically figure out what and how they want to showcase what they're doing. A lot of them focus on the end results and take pictures and pose with their projects and things like that, and we're curious to see what that means for what they're showing off. And similarly, I had done some work in environmental education, and we were always curious to find evidence of student interest and student engagement in environmental education environments to see if that was what they took pictures of, what they wrote about, what they talked about, if that was evidence of interest, of engaged interest and self-directed interest. So that's kind of my background.
Great, thank you. And I would just add that, as I said, I work for the National Writing Project, and what I've come to this work with is also sort of working with teachers, as Jessica referenced, many doing writing workshop or working with youth, putting together writing portfolios and writing in lots of different genres too. So I have that kind of experience working with or learning from educators about that work. But one of the most sort of pivotal ones for me was early when I started working with the Philadelphia Writing Project and seeing the work of the Prospect Center in Vermont. And the reason I wanted to bring them in too is because what they did was, as a community, as a school community, they collected all the work that all the youth were making throughout their learning journey. So they had actually, as a community, a large body of work that they then used to look and understand what they were doing, as well as understand themselves and learning throughout. So I saw the Philadelphia Writing Project and Judy Buchanan particularly leading work around educators learning from looking at the student work that was produced when you look across a body of work. So that was very exciting to me, and sort of what brought me into really wanting to think more deeply about this together. So thanks, everyone. So great. So we just, I would say, well, Christian and Anna said, I should say Christian, just completed a literature review that many people contributed to here for the Open Portfolio Project. He says in that, or he wrote that at its simplest, portfolios have been described as a collection of artifacts to be assessed for a variety of educational and professional purposes. So I just wanted to put that out there as like a working definition for us to play with. I think that everybody here started bringing in all these different aspects of what that can look like and what that can mean, but just sort of as a base definition for us to start with. And I think that this group really shows, kind of the threads that go throughout all this work. So, Stephanie, I was wondering if we could just start with you and dig a little bit more into maker education, what it is, and why you're interested in starting this open portfolio project in the first place.
Sure, I can give a glimpse into it. So the Maker Education Initiative, Maker Ed, as we refer to ourselves a little bit more, we're a national nonprofit based in Oakland, and we started back in 2012. We're still relatively young. We were founded by Dale Doherty, who runs Maker Faire and Make Magazine. And our focus is entirely on education and making. So we work with educators and organizations in all communities throughout the U.S. to help create more opportunities for students to develop confidence, creativity, and interest in learning through making. And that comes through a lot of the programs that we run. And Open Portfolios in specific is a project that we're really excited about because many of the questions that we get are how do we bring together all of the work that's been done by students and teachers alike, actually any learner, and show what's been done. And that we're learning as through our lit review and a lot of our field research what that looks like in the past, in the present, and also into the future. And it's different these days because there are many more both analog and digital tools that are being used to document and capture what learning has happened and what projects have been created. And some of this started also a couple of years back when MIT announced as part of its admissions process that they were going to accept maker portfolios in addition to the normal test scores and other things as part of the admissions package. And we are also very curious and delighted to see that happen and want to see that continue to take place with other companies, organizations, and college admissions.
Oh, that's super exciting. And you said you've seen makers sort of documenting their work. So you're seeing makers how are makers using portfolios? Like why portfolios to maker spaces, I guess? Because you sort of said that a little bit before. And yeah, maybe you could just talk about that and then just to give us a little sense, like why are we thinking about it particularly in Maker Ed?
Yeah, definitely. So I think we're seeing a lot of makers and learners in general document what they do. I think the most common tool is a notebook and sketches, and that pervades and still is wonderful and really exciting to see maker notebooks and design notebooks and learner notebooks and really see what's kind of enmeshed in all of that. But in addition, digital tools are being used, everything from things like Tumblr and other blogging websites to video and photo capabilities and short Vine and all those sorts of things. So it's been really interesting to see the mix and mingle of how these technologies intersect with each other and how they're being used. And additionally, with teachers and educators, we've been exploring how they are having and allowing their students to document what they're doing, both as individual student projects, individual student work, but then also collective work as a whole. And that obviously goes into the direction of assessment and evaluation as well.
Oh, I was thinking that Hilary started talking about how people, this is a way to tell your story in a broader way, and it sounds like this is, very much what this is about. And Hilary also brought up the connected learning, that really thinking about this in a sort of connected learning kind of way. And Christian, I was wondering if you could help us start to surface some of the connected learning issues that portfolios address and why portfolios can be such good solutions for that work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of the way that portfolios kind of function is in this really holistic fashion within the learning environment. And I think that really speaks to, the transdisciplinary nature of the ideas behind connected learning, where, you're kind of working across and through the variety of disciplines that we're learning in, be they art or design or mathematics or writing, and that those things in a portfolio practice have ample opportunity to be interconnected and interwoven in building the portfolio, so that the portfolio doesn't really need to function just within one disciplinary practice of making, regardless what that is, and regardless of whether that's in the informal space of maker spaces, where we're kind of focusing our looking, but also in the classroom space. And then I think that the connection definitely between doing this work in conjunction and collaboration with Maker Education Initiative and these more informal spaces, has a lot of valuable lessons for helping to insert portfolio practice back into the classroom, which has existed for sure in the past, and existed in many ways as an alternative form of assessment to kind of push back against the historical precedent of standardized testing and standardized assessments. But I think that that landscape within education currently today is a difficult place to incorporate a portfolio practice, because it's kind of this more holistic kind of practice where portfolios are not just an add-on, but are more of an integrated aspect of the entire learning environment, and that's how they seem to function really well. But that being said, I think that the lessons that we're going to learn and are learning and will continue to learn with the OPP project, the Open Portfolio Project, will help teachers integrate portfolio practice directly into their classroom, regardless of, kind of more at that local level, I guess. So that we don't have to think necessarily as much about these kind of broader policy changes where portfolio practice kind of trickles down into the classroom, but it's actually this opportunity for it to be kind of integrated into the classroom by the teacher, because portfolios have also been shown to work really well at that local level.
Great, thank you, Christian. That's really interesting. Before we sort of, that brought up a whole sort of strand of thought that I think is really interesting to dig a little bit more. We did have a question, though, from the chat that I just wanted to surface, which is sort of gets this transdisciplinary nature, Christian, that you mentioned. So the question is, do we draw a distinction between arts and crafting and making? So it kind of goes back to sort of defining making and thinking about what do we mean by making, I think. And can making include doing things for yourself versus working in the open with others? So it's also about that sort of individual making as well as collaboration. Does someone want to take that on a little bit? Let's see. Stephanie, do you want? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Sure.
Stephanie.
Sure, I can take a stab at answering the question. I would say yes. We definitely would say making includes arts and crafts for sure. It is a very broad and inclusive definition, and I'll fully admit that we struggle with defining exactly what making is. We do want it to be as broad as possible, recognizing that everyone's interests are diverse, and the quality and the asset behind making is the hands-on, self-directed, inquiry-based learning behind it, and it's very open-ended. So in that sense, it does also include doing things by yourself and for yourself, as well as working collaboratively in an open group. I think some of the portfolio work that we've been doing also really thinks about how makers, whether individual or group, tell their story, and how they showcase their story. So in that sense, yeah, making can be absolutely anything from electronics to woodworking to quilting and everything in between.
That's great. And Anna, I think you were going to add to that a little bit?
I could add to that, yeah. So I think that sort of very inclusive way of seeing making is really the beautiful part of making too. that sort of definitional work maybe happens in practice. So instead of, or comparing that to maybe this term design, making may lower sort of the barrier of entry, especially also for young people to participate in this space, because maybe these sort of professional association might not be linked to that term so much yet.
Great. And Christian, I know we sort of cut you off for a moment there. Do you want to add to that?
I don't think I have as too much to add. I think that was a pretty eloquent way to put it that Stephanie did, and Anna's addition too. My comments were mostly just kind of from this personal perspective of, and I think all of us in this group are actually would consider ourselves makers and have been engaged in a practice of making. Certainly, as you know, as a working artist, I've been engaged in the social community and culture of people who call themselves makers and have for a long time. So, yeah, I think it's definitely this all-inclusive thing, like Stephanie was talking about.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to get back to a comment that was made by Hilary, actually, about the connection she started to make between sort of the discussion about badges and an ecosystem where sort of this, I guess I'm picking up on what you were talking about, Christian, about how, you know, if we start to create an environment where makers have these portfolios and can document and share their work and some shared practices around it, that this could impact both out-of-school spaces and in-school spaces. And I know the badge conversation is kind of about that too. So I just wanted to, and I realize that the Learning Portfolios project with DreamYard and Parsons, you know, I'm just sort of wondering how you guys are exploring portfolios there and how you're thinking about them, and what are the connections that you're making with this open portfolio project?
Sure. And also today, my partner in crime, or thought partner on this, is Jessica Walker, who works at in the summer and pre-college programs. Is also a faculty there. So that it's truly a partnership. So I'm going to try and represent some of the deep thinking that Parsons has done on this. But if you have more questions, she's the one to ask. But they really have a great. We knew we needed to do more work around portfolio, not just in art and design, but you know, we have dance majors, we have young people that want to go on to be doctors. We really wanted something that would help us show the work, and like I said before, tell everyone's stories, and also that a lot of kids are doing stuff in and out of school, and we wanted to be able to show that full story. So it really spoke to us, and the principles that I just wanted to share these quickly that I thought Parsons really came up with, because this is work that they're also doing in their undergrad programs, trying to have their undergrads create these portfolios as learning portfolios as they go along, and kind of the principles that first got us really into this is making the portfolios less linear and more interactive, being less about just final work and more in progress, which I've heard a lot of people talk about, kind of showing your work a little bit more, not just for visual arts, because we know there's a tradition of sort of a physical book that you know, really is just for art and design, but instead making it more multidisciplinary and showing how, you know, whether it involves art or not, that you're really this well-rounded person. You might be great at science and in your church choir, and you know, you do fashion, and that really is going to make you more exemplary of your actual story of who you are and what you have to offer, whether it's a job or school. And then the last piece is making them less static and more easily shareable, and that's really the digital piece for us. And that's what we've been having to, like, the form has been really interesting for us, I think, to figure out. We know we want it to be digital, and in our pilot we really started with teaching teachers how to make class blogs where they were, you know, giving prompts, and I know there's a lot of work that's already been done around that, but that was sort of our first bit, was training them around what blogging is, how to create a class blog, how to prompt your young people, and they did really amazing cool stuff from that, and that could have been like its own project, just like how to teach through blogging. So we've learned a lot through that, and then but then that also becomes a portfolio of a teacher's work. They really liked that became an archive of the work they were doing, and they sort of saw the benefit of it. As a teacher, this is something I can show, you know, others the work I do. And then from there, from those class blogs, the young people were meant to make their own kind of autonomous blog. And what we found is that it takes time just to even get the content that you would want to put in a portfolio, right? So we're sort of breaking out now more into year 1 and 2, that when our young people start with blogging, they're just learning how to blog. We don't even have to say the word portfolio necessary. They're just, working through their process, documenting their work, creating an archive. And really, it's probably not going to be until year 2, unless someone's a senior and really, advanced, that that they would really maybe take that blog with all this great content in it and then refine it a bit to make it into maybe a website or a clearer blog. Because we also get that if it's too much process, no one's going to sift through all that stuff and really go through all 4 years or whatever that you're trying to show. So we are realizing we're trying to find that balance between process and product. And also, lastly, the one big thing is like digital literacy skills in general. So part of the reason we want to do this is to help young people that don't have access to someone, to help them make a slide book or whatever, or how to craft this perfect story to get in to school. We want to make it more democratic and equitable. But if we find that our young people don't even know how to type on a keyboard, but they know how to type on their mobile phone, right? Like, how do we kind of allow for that? How do we teach digital literacy skills while we're teaching portfolio development? And how do we make sure we're not, broadening the divide that we're trying to address by needing these digital skills? And just like, do our schools have enough computers to do this is another big question. So that's kind of a million things in one little answer, but that's sort of what we've been finding, and we're struggling with, and we're happy to be part of a group that we can struggle along with together.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, I think it's because it's this ecosystem. There's all these multiple pieces to it. And you bring up some really interesting ideas that we should dive deeper into as a group. But I want to give Jessica a chance to talk about the Agency by Design Project 2 and Project 0. And I know that they're working both with teachers and learners, so I also wanted to move us into that for a second, too.
Sure. So the Agency by Design Project is so synergistic with all the work here that when the Open Portfolio Project called us, we're like, yes, we're running to Bloomington, Indiana. It's a multi-year research project, and we're looking at the promises, practices, and pedagogies of maker-centered learning, and this is a really emergent space, as you all have brought up and know. The areas where we're really playing and looking were mentioned earlier. Anna said sort of an entry point into design is having students and also teachers build sort of a sensitivity to the designed world through observation, through just looking at objects and systems, interacting with them, and then making them, hacking them, redesigning those objects and systems to gain a sensitivity to their designed world. And in there, to get to that, we're working with teachers trying different, last week in this session, Tina Blythe mentioned things like thinking routines, which is some work that Project Zero has done. So what are some of the thinking routines or thinking moments, opportunities in messing about with design that students can take and might sort of become habits of mind when moving around the designed world? Those, we believe, are moments to capture, to document. So we worked with a group of schools out in Oakland this past year and teachers, and this kind of gets into what Hilary just talked about. The first group is to deal with the teachers to think about how they're going to document this work. At the end of our year of toying around with these activities and maker opportunities, we had a gallery of teacher work, and we spent the year talking with them about documentation and how they might do this in a very broad sense, thinking about bringing in the student voice and images and video, and how are you going to capture these moments, how much product are you going to capture, how much process, etc. And just had amazing gallery of student and teacher work, but it becomes so rich too. It's how do you tease out what you're seeing here, and not what's worth looking at, but what to pay attention to and what you can learn from it. Answering lots of the questions too: digital literacy skills, making opportunities, exploring design, exploring materials. So it's a really, really rich space, and that makes for lots of choices to make. For anybody building a portfolio, anybody looking at it, what the purpose of it might be, curating it. In the digital age, you can capture everything in some ways, and then what? is a really interesting question for us. So those are some of the places we've been playing with some strands of our research, and this portfolio piece really is the way to look at a lot of the things that we've been exploring. So,
Kristen, do you want to pick up on that? I saw your comment, and maybe you can just pick up and say that out loud.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've just been noticing that that the product process tension is kind of a very recurrent theme, and I think that's often a struggle of thinking about portfolios and the way that they're developed, and that always brings up these questions of like, what is the audience, and who is this going to be forward facing to, and who is the portfolio for, and yeah, it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. I certainly no answer or anything like that, but it seems that portfolios have a lot of capacity to be able to be many things to many people, I guess, and have different faces to different venues, and function as this. Well, I had mentioned earlier, how learners can develop their identity as a learner through a portfolio development, and so there's that kind of aspect of who it's for. It's for the audience of the self, but then there's the audience of MIT. I want to go to MIT, and I've created this maker portfolio that I can face out to that. And then there's this aspect of the reflective components that are helping me learn along the way within my learning process, but also providing my teacher or my instructor with this window into my learning process and understanding what I'm doing. So it's interesting that there's this kind of constant tension that often comes up in conversation around portfolios. This tension between, are we, how much product do you include and how much process do you include? But I guess I start to wonder, is it possible to think about just what are the different faces of all of that product and all of that process, and then how does that get structured? I mean, I guess that's in many ways the big problem of what is the design of the portfolio and what tools are you using, and I think that's for sure a lot of what I think Anna will probably be kind of uncovering through the participatory design work that she's going to be engaging in at the sites. Yeah.
Well, I am struck by the fact that Hilary was talking about not even talking about portfolios at first, and really trying to sort of support the habits of mind in being a reflective practitioner. And Kylie Pepler in the last webinar, where they were talking also about looking at student work, brought up this idea of reflecting both in practice and reflecting on practice. And when we talk about portfolios too, we're also talking about both. I think that's what we keep seeing over and over again. And I don't know if anyone wants to continue to comment on this tension and this exciting space. Kind of curious, Hilary, how this has been working too in your project.
Yeah. We're really, just our pilot was it ended up being so much about teaching the teachers. We were just getting into the students making their own blogs and sort of seeing what the, possibilities were and also the challenges. But something this is just making me think about is even like what a, rubric or criteria is for a good blog and a good post. So even like a good, which you could also just call a good reflection. Or a good, we've talked about different types of posts that young people could make, and trying to create this little bank of different ways teachers could bring in different types of posts, whether it's just showing your process, reflecting on your process, going at the end of a unit and reflecting back on the whole thing. One where you just go out and do research and you share your research. So we're just trying to kind of categorize what kind of post could even go on there. And then I think there's a further discussion of, and then what makes it good. And then when you start putting all the pieces, then what makes a good portfolio. And I know that, there's work, whether it's on a blog or not, some of that work's already been done, right, of just like what is a good portfolio. But then we're also trying to kind of change the definition of a portfolio. So I'm talking in circles, but these are, again, like questions that we're wrestling with, and we're about to go into our next 2-year phase. But even just getting everyone started with a new batch of teachers this year, we want to be a little clearer. We were really non-prescriptive before, and we were like, okay, let's try blogging in your classroom and talking about your work. And now I think we need to get a little more prescriptive about, there has to be somewhat agreed upon in our own context of what a good portfolio looks like and what a good post looks like, or a good reflection.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Anna just reminded us of the tension that Jessica brought up about, like, okay, now you've documented stuff, but now what? What then? Because it's so easy to capture things. Anna, do you want to talk about that a little bit too?
Sure, I thought this was really interesting especially because what Andrew brought up in the last Connected Learning talk, he mentioned active versus sort of passive documentation, where maybe we can use our digital tools to capture as we make without necessarily paying too much attention, and sort of using the different tools in different ways, and not so much maybe talking about tools, but sort of about the data that we're capturing. So if we sort of start capturing a bunch of data, it might be really difficult in a way in the end or later on to parse through all of this data. And I think that's also something that Hilary mentioned earlier, to sort of see this balance and how much do we really want to collect and what do we then use to present ourselves, to present our story and so on. But at the same time, collecting all of that information might also give us a great opportunity to find things like sort of a surprise moment that, oh, really? This was something I didn't really notice that. Now I'm noticing it as I'm looking at this massive amount of documentation I created. So I guess that's also something that's really difficult to balance, that sort of large amount of data giving us opportunities, but at the same time burdening us maybe with having to look at the stuff again and again.
I'm being silent because there are comments in our back channel chat, just to admit that we have a little bit of a back channel chat where we can make comments to each other. So I just wanted to open the floor. Christian, you mentioned things about the curation aspect of this work, and because there's data collection and then there's the curation of that data, whether it's by by the maker, and I'm just wondering if people want to speak to that aspect of it too.
Well, I was just thinking about that as in relation to Andrew's comments about this active and passive documentation and the flood of data and information. And then the second comment I made was, obviously I sound like a grad student, but thinking about it from an inquiry perspective, that it's kind of like a grounded theory approach, right? And that kind of determines a little bit your curational aspect in some regard of what you're including when you have this massive data, and then what are the patterns that you see kind of emerging from the work that you've done and everything that you've kind of captured as you've been doing the work, and having those kind of aha moments of what you've been doing, I think is, I think that's a kind of a special moment to have. To kind of have some kind of recognition of what you've been doing only through that flood of information, I think is, has some kind of benefit in some way. Didn't really have anything more to add than that, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. We just got a question from the audience that I was thinking about. What does a good learning portfolio look like? Which I think is a very interesting question. And can we share examples with the audience? So I do know that Learning by Design has a website where you can see some work, but does anybody have other suggestions for people about places to look to see some of these portfolios? and or some thoughts on what good portfolios look like?
I can chime in. Christian says he's stumped, and I'll admit that that's what we're trying to figure out. We don't currently have good examples of good portfolios, and I think that definition will vary from one audience to another and from one learner to another, depending on what they do and don't choose to showcase, and what they do or don't document. And that kind of goes back to the active versus passive aspect of documentation too, which is one, a collection of data, and two, what kind of personal perspective you're coming in at it with. One of the things we've found a lot about encouraging youth to document is that it often interrupts the flow of their work. So having them stop to take a picture of their process can be really difficult because they're in it and they're engaged with it, and that's something we don't necessarily want to disrupt either. So it's a great question, what a good learning portfolio looks like, and we'll be sure to share anything that we find for sure.
I just wanted to encourage my colleagues to jump in, because I know lots of people have things to say here.
Yeah, so I was stumped momentarily for sure, because that is definitely what we're kind of, endeavoring to kind of understand. Like, what does a good portfolio look like? But for sure, we can point to folks who are using portfolios successfully, and when I say using them successfully, I mean that the students, for example, at Envision schools in Oakland, are utilizing their portfolios in their learning process, and the portfolio is part of how they kind of move through their learning experience and graduate. And it's part of their presentation to graduate. And they are also then carried with them, so they don't just stay there at the school and just document what they've been doing at the school, but the portfolios are actually essentially owned by the student and then taken with the student to go apply to college and whatever higher education endeavors they happen to be, moving toward. And not that all, or even many higher education institutions are accepting portfolios, but at least this process of portfolio building across the span of 4 years in high school, if they're not presenting the portfolio directly, they can draw from that portfolio and kind of meta-reflect back on the reflections within the portfolio as to what their learning was, and be able to present that in their application process to schools. Yeah, and then I think the work that Hilary, that you guys are doing in DreamYard and the DreamYard Parsons collaboration for the Learning Portfolios project, I think is another really good example of how portfolios are being used successfully, and a good example of portfolios. And I think it's maybe in the way that we're thinking about what success looks like in how portfolios are being used. And I would say that these notions that Hilary was speaking to about thinking about them as being less linear, multidisciplinary, this kind of personal story, and how they become more shareable. I think those are definitely things that even in the literature, points to as being kind of successful. And then you can see it in practice through what's happening at DreamYard as well.
Jessica, I know you had something to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just this idea about good portfolio made me sort of think of the experience of being involved in a project that looks at MakerEd. And one of I guess I would take this invitation also to say that, sort of historically at Project Zero, we do a research project and then, somewhere down the road a book is published, and we approach this very differently. It's like, well, we're here with the ethos of makers and tinkering and iterating and playing, so let's put a blog up and put stuff up in process, messy. Let's put our research out there as we're finding it. We are sharing teacher work on there as well, but there's also a good portfolio. I think Christian earlier talked about context. So a good portfolio in that moment with that learner and what's happening may be very different than something anybody might share anywhere else. And also, this is a time and a place to play. I mean, quality is an issue, and having too much and being overwhelmed, looking for things. But until you kind of get out there and try things in a class, with a school, or with an informal learning setting, I would be hesitant to sort of say what's a good portfolio, for those learners or for that experience or for that moment. So kind of like, just embrace the kind of maker ethos and get in there and tinker around and then tell us and share out would be a way to maybe approach it.
Awesome. Hilary?
Yeah, it just, what Jessica was saying, raised this other tension that it's great that DreamYard gets to partner with Parsons because they're actually an art and design school and part of a bigger university and have an admissions department, and we haven't had a lot of deep conversations with them yet. But with badges too, part of the whole conversation is like, well, who's accepting this, right? So like, we did have a student, you put a link in to her application to Parsons, and like, but then we don't know, did they look at the digital portfolio? Does it make a difference? If your grades aren't good enough, are they even going to look at it? So part of this whole conversation is admissions departments, employers. It's the same conversation I think we've had around badging about how do we push what's accepted, but also be in conversation with those people who are accepting people, whether to school or to work, so that we're not like setting up our kids to like, yeah, this is the future, and then they get out there and like, well, yeah, no one really is going to accept a link, So there might be other folks in the Open Portfolio Project that are looking at that, but it's just something that we've been grappling with too. You still have to do a regular application to college. We're just hoping that this link that they can put into a blog or a website will be able to help round out the story of their education until all you have to do is send a link, and maybe that'll get you into college or get you a job. I'm not sure what the future will be.
Thank you, Hilary, because I was going to, we don't have much time left, so I was trying to figure out which way to go, but we did have a question about how to pitch this in your context, so whether it's your school or to your administrators or to parents or to students themselves, actually. And I think that gets to this, to the development of an emerging ecosystem. It's like, what are the pieces that have to be in place to really start to support this? And so I don't know if people have thoughts about that question, like how to approach this in your context, and then we can sort of move to talking about how to get involved with this project, because these are ongoing questions. These are big questions that we all need to think about together, and so we'd like to involve others too. So first, it's like how to move this in your own context, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think we wouldn't have been able to do it without our principal at our high school. So we're doing this in an out-of-school setting at our art center where I'm the director of programs, so I get to say yes. And then also our principal at our high school has been a huge champion of this. And I think we already was thinking about portfolios. Didn't matter if it was, I don't know if it mattered, but like, there's a portfolio movement obviously across the country and portfolio schools in New York. And so, but without her championing it and a small group of teachers that really wanted to champion this, I don't see how you could do this just like in a classroom, right? So I think showing them examples or getting one teacher to get really excited about it and start sharing that with other people, you kind of have to go piece by piece. So we started with 4 teachers, and maybe now we'll be going to 10 teachers. So you also can't say like, and now everybody's doing it all at once, and everyone's getting an iPad, and everyone's going to be portfolioing all the time. Like, try and pilot it in your own context and learn from what other people are doing. And then win over the people that might be like, oh, another thing to add to my day and standards and Common Core and all that stuff. So start slowly, I think, but be willing to push that edge.
Stephanie?
Yeah, and going off of Hillary, a lot of the things that we've seen that works with communities and organizations, whether they're schools, museums, libraries, is also often a teacher's champion or a school administrator champion, one who starts is really excited about this work, who sees making and the development of portfolios and documentation as a really great way, an interdisciplinary, iterative approach to learning that allows the student to be at the center of it, and that it really engages both the mind and the hand. And I agree, it really depends on context, and sometimes it works specifically for one classroom or one club, but certainly it can move widely and forward in many different ways.
And I'm going to put my 2 cents in here too, because what I heard actually from a lot of the talk and the examples, especially between Jessica and Hilary, are these examples of where educators themselves are getting the opportunity to actually start to develop their own portfolios of practice. And so in a writing project style way, educators themselves get a chance to experience what they might work with their students and their learners on. And I think that could be a really powerful way to support thinking in new ways and kind of bringing in new practices and into different kinds of spaces. Jessica, were you going to say something? Okay. Okay, great. So just because we are at the top of the hour, we have 2 minutes, so I really don't want to miss letting folks who are tuning in today get a chance to find out how to get involved, to learn more, to contribute their ideas, and help to further this conversation. So maybe, Anna, I'll pass that over to you, and of course I invite Stephanie and Christian to add to this too.
Sure. Thanks, Christina. So I think also this context specificity that we just ended our conversation with is really something that we're moving towards as the next steps in our project. So we'll be visiting different maker sites and performing participatory design workshops with the young makers and the educators in those spaces. And I think so this is definitely also a way to get involved, to fill out our site surveys that we have passed out right now or that are really ongoing, that we'll be using also for selecting the kind of maker sites that we want to be visiting. So we'd really love for everybody to fill out that survey, and I think we'll be sharing links to the survey on the website. Christina's nodding her head, so that's great. And if you want to find out more about the Open Portfolio Project, there's a website on the Maker Education Initiative pages specifically for this project, where you could also register on the interest form if you want to receive emails and so forth about the project in the future. So these are really good opportunities to get involved, and we're really hoping for people to get involved and share their interests about portfolios and really learn from the community out there working with portfolios in makerspaces specifically.
Great. So Stephanie says yes. So we're really excited about this project, and I just really want to thank everybody so much for being part of this Educator Innovator Connected Learning webinar today. And this whole series this month has been so rich and fascinating with conversation, and we encourage everybody to continue the conversation at the Connected Learning hashtag. And if you want to stay informed about, also the Google Plus community. I'm looking at my notes to remind me. So the Google Plus community is a great place to continue these conversations in addition to what Anna shared. The Connected Learning hashtag. And then if you want to stay informed about upcoming webinars at Connected Learning TV, make sure to sign up for the newsletter at connectedlearning.tv. And also, there's a whole bunch of connected learning activities happening this summer. So we just want to make sure that you check out the makesummer.org website. It's folks from all over the globe really doing a range of activities, many that you can plug in to during the summer, and also to follow the hashtag MakeSummer. So with that, I wanted to just say goodnight. Thank everybody for connecting today, and have a really wonderful, maker-filled, connected summer this summer.